So hey there, thanks very much for checking out my YouTube videos. I do greatly appreciate it. It's always nice to get a thumbs up or a subscription. I would really appreciate that. That'd be wonderful. So we were talking the other day about OMVIC, and we were going to do some little shorts to kind of go over the OMVIC course book and kind of have little highlights and maybe have a little interjection and say, okay, well, this is how this has applied to me in the past, or this is what's occurred using OMVIC kind of as a reference point. Now I'm trying to keep these really short. So we're trying to be around that 5, maybe 10-minute mark, if that. So just be aware of it. So some of these might be pretty rapid. So again, this might help you out in reference to going over the training book, or if you're doing their online course, or who knows. But anyways, I just thought I'd interject some thoughts. That's all. And again, these aren't scripted, okay? And it's not written in stone. So in other words, do your own research. This is just kind of a moment, that's all. So we're in chapter 16, and I'm just flipping over the book, that type of thing. And because I just bought a car, the 2013 Hyundai Genesis, not off of a dealer, so OMVIC doesn't apply to a private sale. So that's something you should be aware of if you're out there shopping. But regardless, we're going to talk about as is. So looks like OMVIC has a very clear definition of what an as is car is. So, and they basically say in the first little paragraph here, as is has different meanings, different people. And I think that's a subjective term. And it's probably well proven that prior to kind of outlining this for a dealer, an as is car would be very subjective, right? So it'd be one of those things where, is it a salvage car? Is it a flooded car? Is it a car that is currently on fire? Because that's as is, right? Or is it as is because the tires are bald? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's really a mix there as far as that's concerned. Again, always rely on your own common sense. Have a vehicle inspected prior to actually purchasing it, even when it's listed as is, unless you're buying it for parts, which case, who cares, right? So it's one of those things. Just be aware of it. So there's no longer any debate about the actual term of as is. So Sales of Goods and Service Act, obligation of the Consumer Protection Act 2022. If the buyer is a consumer, which would be all of us. Actually, that's not true. There might be wholesale to wholesale. So you might actually get a dealer to dealer. And that actually, to be honest with you, I've dealt with dealer to dealer as is sales. That's a whole different kettle of fish. Trust me on this one. If you're buying as a dealer, as is, there's no going back. Like, you're lucky it's a car. Like that's it. As is, so off the cliff as a dealer. So just be aware of that. Even on the auction scenario, as is, where is, it's that car right there. Could be made of cheese. You don't know, right? So okay, so this is interesting. This is why you're going to see on the advertising when you're on Kijiji looking at dealers' ads, and they say as is must include disclosures concerning the condition of the vehicle. So in other words, that's why they would say this vehicle is not roadworthy. They're protecting themselves, or may require substantial repair in excess of $3,000 in order to make this vehicle roadworthy, subject to, right? So that's why you're going to see on the bottom of those little Kijiji ads. I think even some of the Facebook stuff, you're going to see like a paragraph and a half. And this is the reason why they're trying to clarify what the as is means. The motor vehicle sold under this contract, sold as is, and not represented being roadworthy in condition, mechanically sound, maintenance in any, so essentially that little paragraph there that you're going to read in the book has to be transferred over to any kind of marketing item that you might have with the car. It's also going to be on the bill of sale. So very clear on that. Dealers should not allow a vehicle sold as is to be driven off the lot by consumers. Okay, so I've experienced that. So when I bought my 2012 GMC 1500 off of the government auction, it was sold as is. And they made it very clear that you could not physically drive it off their lot. Now, at the same time, they really didn't police it. But they made that very clear on pickup, that as far as they were concerned, it was on the hook and you were leaving. It wasn't going to be a drive off. Again, they kind of looked the other way, but at the same time, it was one of those things where they made it very clear from that standpoint. Okay, and a vehicle with a safety standard certificate cannot be stated as is. So in other words, if you sold the vehicle, and actually this is actually an interesting thing. So when you see a dealership advertising a car and they have it kind of, it's one of those really gray areas where you see that they've got 10995. The vehicle is sold 10995. Vehicle for sale for 10995, right? And then they go at the bottom, safety is an additional $1,200. And we see this in the GTA, not so much out here in the smaller towns. So I think in the smaller towns, what happens is word of mouth gets around that it's kind of a bit of a sleazy price structure. And there's probably administrative charges hidden within that as well for financing. So it's one of those things that it's kind of a red flag if you're out shopping. You kind of go, oh, well, it's in addition to, whereas what they're telling you is if it's sold with a safety, you can't then sell the car as is. So in other words, there has to be some sense that there's a standard of roadworthiness with the vehicle, which as a dealer, if you're out there, you'd want to make sure you really want to protect yourself by putting in a few other little clauses to kind of help you out there. You may want to verify the AC is working, or that it isn't working, or that it potentially won't work, because that can come back and bite you. You may want to put down that there's any kind of imperfections or flaws on the car within the contract, and it may sound like you're nitpicking at things as a dealer. You're not. And that's why when you go to a new car franchise and you're buying a brand new car, that you'll get a little folder with the contracts. It'll make you sign 3 or 4 different ones. If you flip them over on the backside, you'll see like 18 different conditions and 18 different scenarios on the bill of sale. Again, it's because they've experienced the as-is fun as far as that's concerned through OMVIC. Now, what I found, at least if you're operating as a dealer, the limited time that I spent as it, if you do go to OMVIC, the majority of the time they're going to want to reverse the sale. And there may be damages involved as well, but traditionally it's a reversal of the sale and a little mark on your record as a dealer. Salespeople tend to get a little bit less depending on the structure of the business, but even they'll get kind of balled into that. So if you're selling, if your business model is to get in and sell low cash cars, like you want to be in that $5,000 to $10,000 market, it's a very tricky market to be in. It's one of those things where you need to have a mechanical background just to kind of cover yourself a little bit, or be very familiar with the car market unto itself and that as-is clause. It's not a get out of jail free statement. And I think back in the day, like if you went back like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it would have been one of those things where, oh, it's as is, hands are free and clear of it. You bought it such and such. Today, that as is claim, especially because of a perception of how they may be viewing that as is statement, isn't considered as cut and dry as it used to be. So that's the explanation of what an as is car sale is, as far as that's concerned. Private deals, yeah, as is essentially good luck with that. And that's where if you're buying off of a registered dealer, you have some recourse to go through with OMVIC in the event that you bought a car that wasn't disclosed properly, or you bought a car that had a statement attached to it and you found out afterwards, like maybe there's a lien registered, or that as-is statement was really questionable from that standpoint. Well, you'd have OMVIC to go back to and be able to have some sort of recourse before you went into the court system. So that's what as-is all about in the Canadian marketplace. Well, in Ontario. I think it mirrors Alberta as well. I think the Alberta Motor Vehicle Council out there, I think they basically just copied the Ontario one, or they're very, very close. I'm not sure what the Quebec one is. I've never had to deal with them. But I'm going to assume that Quebec is probably a completely different kettle of fish, because they always are different. So it's one of those things where you'll see a lot of cars from the Quebec market move into the Ontario market. So it's one of those things we'll have a discussion about probably in another little 10-minute video. We'll talk about origins and provincial differences between cars. But that's what the as-is in the OMVIC book is. So again, not as cut and dry as you think it would be. So have a pleasant and enjoyable day.